Hey everyone, and welcome back to Hoffman Engineering. I'm working on the Mordin Solus Project, my attempt at a Mordin Solus cosplay to celebrate the release of Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Last video, we painted and assembled the Carnifex pistol, designed by Jess the Mullet. This is what we ended with, all assembled and smoothed with wood filler. So now it's time for paint. First step in painting is primer. Specifically, this is filler primer, a thick primer that is perfect for helping smooth out the layer lines of 3D prints. If you want to learn more about that technique, you can see my video on filler primer linked in the cards. I sprayed an even coat and let it dry for a day. Then, using 220 grit sandpaper, I sanded down the high points. This process was repeated 2 more times for a total of 3 coats of filler primer. The end result is a smooth surface, with most of the 3D printed layer lines hidden. The Carnifex has a 2-tone color scheme. I used painter's tape to mask off the handle sections, and then used a Rust-Oleum gunmetal gray spray paint to paint the top sections, the trigger, and the bottom grip connectors. 2 coats of spray paint, waiting a couple of minutes in between each coat. Before the paint had fully cured, I removed the painter's tape to leave a nice clean edge. The next day, I can mask off the gunmetal gray sections and paint the grips with the Rust-Oleum flat black spray paint. I used the same process as before, where I applied 2 thin coats a few minutes apart. Once the paint had started to dry, I removed the masking tape and let the paint cure for the next couple of days. The final bit of paints are some details. Using more painter's tape, I freehand masked off the areas of the decals, and then it's time for paint. I was concerned with paint bleeding under the edges of the masking tape, so this time I tried a new trick. I've heard if you spray a coat of clear coat, the clear coat would bleed under the masking tape and the transparent paint would seal it. Then any coats of colored paint wouldn't bleed under, and you'd have a nice, crisp edge. The clear coat I used was a Rust-Oleum crystal clear enamel, followed by a Rust-Oleum red enamel. And I think that technique was a great success. There was no bleed of the red that I could see. I wanted to start weathering those red decals, so I tried wiping away the paint with a paper towel, but it had dried too quickly for it to really work, so I'll have to weather it afterwards. Now with the paint done, it's time for a few decals. I used the Cricut vinyl cutter to cut out some decals on some white vinyl, so I could match the font better than I could painting them by hand. I applied the decals letter by letter, doing my best to line things up correctly. Patience is key here, taking time to position them the best that I could. With the decals done, this was also a good moment to fit in a spring to the trigger so that it wasn't just swinging on its own. And the paint is complete. The hand cannon looks great. However, it looks way too new. So it's time to weather it. Give it some wear and tear that gives it character. I wanted to try a new technique this time, so I purchased some Rub and Buff. This is a wax that contains metallic particles and should give an awesome metallic finish. First, I used the silver leaf Rub and Buff. I applied a little with a Q-tip, and then rubbed it in with the clean end of the Q-tip. I found that a little of this goes a long ways, and just lightly touching the surface would leave a bright silver surface. I used it to emulate scratches and dings all over the pistol, focusing on the areas more likely to get scratches, any high points, and the edges of details. With the first pass of silver Rub and Buff applied, I made a quick wash of black acrylic paint and water to apply over the surface. I'd brush on the wash and then dab it off with a paper towel. This leaves a darker shadow in the recesses where the paper towel couldn't reach, giving it a dirtier and more worn appearance. I applied that wash all over the entire pistol. The silver Rub and Buff ended up a little too shiny in some areas, so then I used some ebony Rub and Buff to dirty up the silver. Using more Q-tips, I brushed on the ebony near the silver, as well as some of the deeper recesses. The ebony really made the details pop while looking at it, and it gives a whole new dimension to the details. Now, no prop is complete without some LEDs. For this project, I'll use some 5mm blue LEDs, a 500 mAh LiPo battery, and a power boost converter and a battery charger. First, I solder on the headers for the power boost. Then I quickly test the circuit on a breadboard. The positive 5 volts connects to a couple of LEDs, then through some resistors to limit the current, and back to the negative terminal. With the circuit prototyped, I can then cut some perf board and solder it all together. Finally, I cut a couple of clear plastic windows and used 400 grit sandpaper to scuff the surface to diffuse the lights. I put the windows in, then the LEDs, and then I used a little hot glue to secure it, and then made sure the batteries and wires are secured. And this project is done. Let's look at the Glamour Shots. It's amazing how much life a little paint and a couple of LEDs gives to these props. And when comparing the pre-weathered prop to the final prop, the results speak for themselves. I am impressed with Rub and Buff, and I can't wait to keep trying it on future projects. So thank you all for joining me on the Carnifex Hand Cannon project. This is just the first part of the larger Mordin Solus project, so stay tuned for more costuming and cosplay making. If you have suggestions for tools, techniques, or ideas for Mordin Solus, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.